everyone, and welcome back to Full Throttle Friday. I'm Kimby, and this week we are diving into the Hungarian Grand Prix. This weekend we had a lot of unexpected shakeups, technical challenges, and amazing on the track battles. Hungarian Grand Prix is a race that demands precision from its drivers, but this week's race gave us storylines from practice 1 all the way to the checkered flag. So let's dive into what happened during this race week. Okay, so this weekend we saw cars pulling out with new upgrades to their cars. Mercedes back with the old suspension because they just were not feeling comfortable with their new ones. You have Red Bull and Racing Bull who came out with new braking suspension and cooling suspension. And then you have Aston Martin who put a new front wing on their cars. We also got to see a very interesting practice 1 round when we had Paul Aaron get his second shot at Formula One, and he stood in for Nico Hulkenberg in Suber. We also saw Felipe Drogovic fill in for Fernando Alonso after Fernando Alonso pulled a back and neck muscle and was advised by his team not to drive in practice 1 for this weekend. We had overall good weather for this weekend. During qualifying 2, we saw a little bit of rain, but for the most part, it was super sunny conditions. The drivers had a pretty good weekend overall. We did have some interesting things happen during the practice rounds, including Pierre Gasly lost power in the beginning of P1. Hamilton was having issues and lost power halfway through the practice rounds. And Paul Aaron triggered a yellow flag with a systems critical error, which meant he was not able to finish practice 1. We saw so many interesting things this weekend from the drivers, including we had so many lockups with the tires on turn 1. Max Verstappen, who is normally so good with this track, had so much understeer and oversteering issues during practice rounds and a little bit during qualifying. But Max did give us a very comical P3 when he came out from pitting and he had a rag in his cockpit. So he, during turn 3, pulled over while racing and threw it out. You never know what is going to happen during these practice rounds or race, but he had everyone guessing what it was he threw out of his cockpit, till later in an interview he confirmed it was a rag. We had so many interesting moments from some of the other drivers, including Isaac Hadjar, who had a little bit of a spin on one of the turns. Yuki Tsunoda got sent out on the wrong setting of his car and his lap time got deleted. And then you have Carlos Sainz, who had a electrical issue with his car where he lost communication with his team and almost had to box. But luckily, before he boxed, they were able to get it all fixed and figured out. Let's get into qualifying. Qualifying had some interesting challenges of its own, including during Q2, it wanted to start to rain. So the drivers had some interesting challenges with their tire grip. Charles Leclerc got his first pole position of this season. We were celebrating Max Verstappen's 200th start with Red Bull for this race season. Our top 4 drivers were separated by by 500ths of a second, and Aston Martin got their best start time this season with P5 and P6. Lights out, it was so interesting. George jumped all the way up to 3rd place, where Fernando Alonso moved to 4th, and poor Lando Norris went from P3 to P5. Some other interesting battles at the very start of the race was Gabriel Bortoleto passing Lance Stroll for 6th position, while Lando Norris uses his DRS to get back the 4th place position from Fernando Alonso. We also had some very interesting investigations come from the beginning of the race. Both Gabriel Bortoleto and Nico Hulkenberg were both under investigation for a jump start in the race before it started. Gabriel was proven not to have started before the race, but Nico Hulkenberg, on the other hand, did start before the race and got a 5-second penalty that he took during one of his pit stops. We saw some very interesting track action, including Charles Leclerc getting the fastest lap by lap 3. We had Max Verstappen getting to P7 by the 4th lap, and Max and Gabriel were fighting for position 6 within the first couple laps. We had some very interesting on-track battles as well. George Russell had a near miss with Franco Colapinto on lap 25. Max and Nico almost collided around lap 23 or 24. And then we also had Max and Lewis, who went at it at turn 4 that caused Hamilton to have to go wide. We also had George and Franco Colapinto on lap 25, where George almost rear-ended him and caused a collision, but was able to pull back in time. We also almost had a collision from Max and Nico on lap 23 or 24 of the race. We also can't forget about Charles Leclerc, who was under braking with George Russell, which almost caused a collision, and it caused Charles to get a 5-second time penalty during the end of the race. Oscar Piastri pulled a key move on Charles Leclerc as well in lap 51 to get around him. We also had some standout moments, including Charles Leclerc, who got on pole position for the very first time, but sadly was not able to keep it. He just got outdriven by McLaren, and today they just had a better strategy than Ferrari. We also have Max Verstappen, who aggressively climbed when he got put in the bottom after his pit stop, which he was not happy about, because it put him in a cluster of drivers that were just a little bit slower than his car. He also had car balance problems he was not happy with this weekend. And yes, he really did throw a rag out of his car in practice 3. So that was a interesting moment, to say the least, from Max. We also had Lando Norris, who had a little bit of a rougher start with just getting getting put into P5 when everyone got out of the gate. But he was able to keep pace, get ahead of everyone, and he secured his P1 win. Oscar Piastri, his teammate, also had a really good race weekend this week. They both were in the top 2 for P1 lap times for all of the practices, actually. And he just could not quite get past his teammate on the very last laps. But he did try as hard as he could. Felipe Dovovich also did a really good job stepping in for Fernando Alonso and bringing the car home. But on the other hand, Paul Aaron sadly had a rougher day and was not able to finish the race due to car issues. But he did some amazing lap times in the very first half hour of practice 1. Before we pull into the pit lane and call it a day, here's a quick teaser about next week's episode. We are going full throttle on McLaren. Let's be real, McLaren has had an amazing season so far. Both of their drivers have been so good and on top of their game. They are currently leading the Constructor Title Championship, and Oscar Piastri is in the lead for the World Championship, with Lando Norris right behind him, only separated by 9 points, which is so amazing. So next week we are gonna dive deeper into just everything McLaren. That's all next week. I hope you enjoyed this Hungarian Grand Prix recap of everything that happened during the race week. We had it all this week, from Max throwing a rag out of his car, to rookies learning lessons, to penalties and fights for the podium. This weekend was packed with storylines and a bunch of amazing racing. Next week, we are gonna shift gears and go into all things McLaren, as we are gonna be taking a 2-week break from the F1 racing. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tune in next week as we dive into all things McLaren. Don't forget, keep it fast, keep it clean, and keep it full throttle. And I will see you on the grid.